My own son tried to kill me with a box of poisoned chocolates, and I unknowingly saved my life by making my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren jealous. When he called me, asking if I had eaten the chocolates, I told him no, that I had given them to Laura and the kids. The silence on the other side of the line was deafening. Then he yelled like a desperate man, "You did what?" At that moment, I did not understand why Thomas was so upset. I thought he was angry because I had given his gift to other people. How naive I was. My name is Dorothy. I am 69 years old. For 40 years, I sacrificed everything for my son, Thomas. Everything. My youth, my dreams, my savings. I adopted him when he was just 2 years old, after his biological parents died in an accident. I gave him my last name, my unconditional love, my entire life. But that day, the day of my 69th birthday, everything changed. That box of artisanal chocolates that arrived at my door looked like a beautiful gift from a grateful son. The chocolates were exquisite, expensive. They came in an elegant box with a card that read, "To the best mother in the world. With love, Thomas." I was so touched. It had been months since I had received any affectionate gesture from him. Since he married Laura, everything changed. She arrived like a storm in our lives, filling my son's head with poison against me. "Your mother is too nosy," she would say. "You are too old for her to be taking care of you," she would whisper in his ear. And Thomas, my Thomas, the boy I raised with so much love, began to change. Little by little, he drifted away. Visits became scarcer, calls colder, hugs more distant. But I kept hoping. I kept believing that my son would go back to being the person he was before. That morning, when the chocolates arrived, I thought it had finally happened. That my son had remembered how much he loved me. That Laura had not managed to completely destroy the bond we had built for so many years. The chocolates looked delicious. They were from an exclusive brand, the kind that cost a fortune. Each piece was a work of art, decorated with golden details and perfect shapes. But me, oh, I was always like that. Always thinking of others before myself. These chocolates are too good for me alone, I thought. Laura and the kids will enjoy them much more. The little ones had always been my weakness. Despite all the disdain their mother showed me, I adored those children. They were my grandchildren, the extension of my Thomas, the only pure thing left in that toxic relationship. So I took the box, carefully rewrapped it, and headed to Thomas's house, which was just a short drive from my home in upstate New York. When I knocked on the door, it was Laura who opened it. As always, she greeted me with that fake smile that I hated so much. That smile that did not reach her eyes, that screamed contempt, even though her lips tried to feign courtesy. "Hello, Dorothy," she said, with that condescending tone she used with me. "What brings you by?" I handed her the box of chocolates and explained that they were from Thomas for me, but that I wanted to share them with her and the children. For a moment, I saw something strange in her eyes, like surprise, but not the good kind. It was more like fear, confusion. But she quickly composed her expression and took the box. "What a nice gesture from Thomas," she murmured. "The kids will be thrilled." She did not invite me in. She never did. She always found an excuse to keep me at the door, as if I were a traveling salesperson and not the grandmother of her children. That time she said the children were sleeping, that it had been a long day, that perhaps another day would be better. I went home with a slightly sad heart, but also with a certain satisfaction. I had done something good. I had shared the joy of my son's gift with his family. That night, I went to bed thinking that maybe, just maybe, that gesture would help smooth things over between Laura and me. The next day, the phone rang early. It was Thomas. His voice sounded strange, tense. "Mom," he said to me, "how were the chocolates?" The question took me by surprise. It was rare for him to be so interested in knowing if I had enjoyed a gift. Usually, after giving me something, he seemed to completely forget about the matter. "Oh, Thomas," I replied honestly, "I gave them to Laura and the kids. You know how much they love sweets." The silence that followed was terrifying. It was as if the world had stopped. I could hear my own heart beating as I waited for his answer. Then he exploded. "You did what?" he yelled with a fury I had never heard in his voice. "I gave them to Laura and the children." "You're crazy." His voice trembled in a way that frightened me. It was not just anger. It was pure panic. "Thomas, I don't understand," I said, trying to stay calm. "I thought you'd be happy that I shared your gift with your family." But he kept shouting, increasingly desperate. He asked me over and over if I was sure I had not eaten a single chocolate, if I had given the whole box, if the children had already eaten them. His questions were so specific, so urgent, that I began to suspect. Why did he care so much that I had not tried the chocolates? Why did he seem relieved that I had not eaten them, but desperate that I had given them to his own family? He hung up abruptly after shouting that I was an idiot, that I had ruined everything. I was left with the phone in my hand, trembling, not understanding what had happened. But something inside me, a maternal instinct that I had developed over years of caring and protecting, told me that something was terribly wrong. That afternoon, Laura called me. Her voice sounded different, worried. "Dorothy," she said to me, "the children felt sick after eating the chocolates. We had to take them to the hospital in Staten Island." My blood ran cold. "What happened to them?" I asked with my heart in my throat. "The doctors say it was food poisoning," she replied. "But it's strange. The chocolates smelled odd when we opened them, but the children had already eaten several before we realized it." My world began to crumble. The chocolates my son had sent me, the chocolates I had given with so much love, had made my grandchildren sick. But there was something else. In Laura's voice, I detected something that made me tremble. It was fear, yes, but also understanding. As if she had finally grasped something that had been happening right under her nose without realizing it. That night, I could not sleep. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Thomas's reaction when he learned that I had given the chocolates away, his desperation at knowing that I had not eaten them, his relief mixed with panic, the specific questions about whether I had tried even a tiny piece. And then, like a lightning bolt in the darkness, the truth hit me with all its brutal force. My son, my own son whom I had raised and loved unconditionally, had tried to poison me. The following days were a nightmare. The children recovered, thank goodness, but the poison had left its mark. Laura confessed to me that the doctors had found traces of arsenic in their little bodies. Arsenic, a word I had only heard in crime movies. Now it was part of my most horrible reality. My daughter-in-law, for the first time in years, spoke to me without that mask of contempt. Her voice trembled when she told me, "Dorothy, I think those chocolates were not meant to be shared. I think they were specifically for you." Her words confirmed what my heart already knew, but my mind refused to accept. Thomas had disappeared. He did not answer the phone. He did not reply to messages. When Laura went to look for him at his job at the Manhattan accounting firm, they told her he had requested emergency time off. He had run away like the coward he was, leaving his wife and children to suffer the consequences of his devilish plan. But I knew my son. I knew where to find him. I knew that when he felt cornered, He always ran to the same place, the house of his Aunt Natalie, my younger sister. She had always had a weakness for Thomas, always justifying his mistakes, protecting him from the consequences of his actions. I drove to Natalie's house with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. 40 years of unconditional love, 40 years of sacrifices, 40 years of giving everything I had. And this was what I received in return. A son who wanted to see me dead. When I knocked on the door, Natalie opened it with a look of guilt. "Dorothy," she murmured, "I didn't know you were coming, but I had already seen Thomas's car parked on the corner." "I know he's here," I said in a voice I did not recognize as my own. Thomas appeared behind her like a ghost. His face was drawn, his eyes sunken, but what struck me the most was the expression on his face. There was no remorse. There was no guilt. There was only resentment, as if I were the culprit of this whole disaster. "Why?" was the only thing I could ask him. "Why did you want to kill me?" My voice broke on that last word. Kill me. My own son had wanted to kill me. His answer broke my soul into 1,000 pieces. "Because you're a burden," he said with a coldness that chilled my blood. "Because you've always been a burden. Because I need your inheritance and you never die." My inheritance, of course. It all came down to money. The money I had saved for decades working day and night. The money I had saved living like a pauper to secure a future for him. The money I planned to leave him when I died naturally, of old age, surrounded by the love of my family. "But I didn't know you had so much money," he continued with that poisonous voice. "Until I saw the bank documents when you got sick last year. $200,000, Mom. 200,000 that I need now, not when you're 90 years old. $200,000 that I had earned with blood, sweat, and tears. $200,000 that represented 40 years of work, deprivations, of sleepless nights working double shifts to give him the best education, the best clothes, the best opportunities. Besides," he added, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "you're old. What else are you going to do with your life? Why do you need so much money at your age?" His words were daggers in my heart. Every syllable was a deeper betrayal than the last. Natalie tried to intervene. "Thomas, don't talk like that," she murmured, but he silenced her with a look. "Aunt, you know I'm right. She's already lived her life. I have a family to support, children to educate, a future ahead of me." "A future built on my corpse," I replied with a bitterness I did not know I had inside. "A future bought with my death." He looked at me with contempt, as if I were the crazy one, as if I were the villain in this twisted story. "Don't be dramatic," he told me. It was going to be quick. The chocolates had enough arsenic to look like a natural heart attack. No one would have suspected anything. You would have died peacefully, sleeping, and I would have inherited what was going to be mine anyway. His words revealed the depth of his betrayal. It had not been an impulse, a moment of madness. It had been a calculated, meticulous, cold plan. He had researched the poison. He had bought the most expensive chocolates to disguise the taste. He had calculated the exact dose. My death had been planned with the same dedication that I had put into planning his birthdays for so many years. "And what happened?" I asked him. "Why didn't your perfect plan work?" His face twisted into a grimace of frustration. "Because you're too stupid to eat chocolates your own son gives you," he spat at me. "Because you always have to be the martyr. You always have to give everything. You always have to be the selfless, saintly mother." The irony was suffocating. The very flaw he criticized in me, my tendency to give rather than receive, had been what saved my life. My instinct to share the gift with his children had destroyed his homicidal plan. "But the worst part," he continued with rising anger, "is that now Laura knows everything. The children were about to die because of you, because of your damn compulsion to share what does not belong to you. He blamed me. After trying to murder me, he blamed me for the poisoning of his own children. Laura had appeared in the doorway during our conversation. Her face was pale, her eyes full of tears. She had heard everything. The final confirmation that her husband had not only tried to kill his mother-in-law, but had been willing to sacrifice his own children in the process. "Thomas," she said with a broken voice, "how could you? How could you put our children in danger?" He turned to her with the same coldness he had shown me. "Because nothing was going to happen," he replied. "Because the poison was for her, not for you." "But you knew I always share everything with the children," Laura yelled. "You knew there was a chance they would eat those chocolates." Thomas shrugged as if he were talking about the weather. "It was a calculated risk," he muttered. "A calculated risk." The children I had helped raise, the children who filled my afternoons with joy when everything else had turned grey, had been a calculated risk for him in his plan to murder me. At that moment, I understood that the son I had raised, the boy I had adopted and loved as if he had come from my own body, had died a long time ago. The man in front of me was a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had been able to look me in the eye for years while planning my death. "It's over," I told him with a calm that surprised me. "Everything is over between us." He laughed, a bitter, cruel laugh. "What are you going to do, Mum? Call the police? Report your own son? You know you'll never do that. You're too weak. Too weak." For 40 years, I had been too weak to tell him no. Too weak to set limits. Too weak to see that my unconditional love had turned him into a monster. But that day, in that house, in front of the evidence of his absolute betrayal, something changed inside me. "You're right," I told him. "I've been too weak for too long, but that ends today." I turned and started walking toward the door. "Wait and see what a weak woman can do when she finally finds her strength." His screams followed me into the street. He yelled that I was an ingrate, that after everything he had done for me, I was abandoning him. Everything he had done for me. The height of cynicism. Trying to kill me was, in his twisted mind, something he had done for me. That night, in the solitude of my home, I cried as I had not cried in decades. I cried for the son I had lost, for the wasted years, for the betrayed love. But above all, I cried for the woman I had been, naive, permissive, blind to the evil that was growing before my eyes. When the tears stopped, I made a decision. Thomas was right about one thing. I was too weak. But that weak woman was dying that night. Tomorrow, a new Dorothy would be born. A Dorothy who had learned that love without limits is not a virtue. It is complicity. A Dorothy who had discovered that sometimes, to protect yourself, you have to become what your enemies least expect. My phone rang. It was Stanley, my lawyer, an old family friend. "Dorothy," he told me. "Laura called me. She told me everything. Are you all right?" For the first time in days, I smiled. "I'm perfect, Stanley, and I have work for you." The transformation was not immediate, but it was total. Over the next few weeks, while Thomas believed he had emotionally destroyed me, I was building the foundations of my revenge. The first step was to move. I could not continue living in that house where I had raised a viper, where every corner reminded me of my naivety. Stanley helped me find an apartment in the most exclusive area of the city, Upper East Side. A penthouse with a panoramic view, which cost more in 1 month than Thomas earned in 3. When I signed the lease, I saw the surprise in the eyes of the real estate agent. A 69-year-old woman, modestly dressed, paying cash for a luxury apartment. "It's for my retirement," I told her with a smile. I decided it was time to give myself some treats. Retirement. What a liberating word. I was retiring from being a mother. I was retiring from being the victim. I was retiring from being the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. The apartment was spectacular. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen that looked like it was out of a magazine. But what I liked most was the study, a quiet space where I could plan, where I could think, where I could become the strategist Thomas had never imagined I could be. Stanley was my first ally in this new life. For years, he had handled my basic legal affairs, wills, insurance, minor procedures. But now I needed something more. I needed a legal warrior who would help me systematically dismantle the life of the man who had tried to murder me. Dorothy, he told me in our first serious meeting, this is going to be brutal. Thomas is not going to give up easily. He's going to fight. He's going to lie. He's going to try to manipulate the situation in his favor. I leaned back in his office's leather chair and looked him in the eye. Stanley, he underestimated me for 40 years. Now it's my turn to surprise him. The first thing we did was secure my money. Thomas knew about the main account, but he did not know about the other three. He did not know about the certificates of deposit that I had been religiously renewing every year. He did not know about the stocks I had bought with the extra money from my weekend jobs. He did not know that his stupid mother had built a modest but solid financial empire. In total, Stanley told me after reviewing all the documents, we are talking about almost $400,000, not $200,000 as he believes. $400,000. 40 years of sacrifice turned into economic power. 40 years of living like a poor woman to die like a queen. But money was only a tool. The real weapon was information. Stanley hired a private investigator, a former police officer named Robert, who specialized in family cases. What we discovered in the following weeks left me speechless. Thomas had not only planned my death for the inheritance, he had debts that I was unaware of. Gambling debts, debts with loan sharks, debts that had turned my death into an urgent necessity for him. My son was not just a frustrated murderer. He was a bankrupt gambler who had bet his family's future at my expense. Here is the evidence, Robert said, handing me a folder full of photographs, documents, bank records. Your son owes more than $50,000 to very dangerous people, people who do not accept excuses. The photographs showed him in Atlantic City casinos, in clandestine betting houses in Queens, in nighttime meetings with threatening-looking men. He had mortgaged the house where he lived with Laura without telling her anything. He had pawned his wife's car. He had emptied the children's savings accounts to pay interest. My son was not only a murderer, he was a thief who had stolen his own family's future. Laura doesn't know anything about this, Robert continued. He has been lying to her for months. He tells her he has problems at work, that payments are late, that they need to economize. But the truth is that he is using the house money to gamble. The information was devastating, but it was also perfect. Thomas had built his own prison with his lies and addictions. I just had to push the bars so that everything would collapse. Meanwhile, he thought he had defeated me. 3 weeks had passed since our confrontation at Natalie's house, and I had given no sign of life. I had not called him. I had not shown up at his house. I had not made any drama. In his narcissistic mind, this confirmed his theory. I was too weak to face him. But I was working. Every day, from my new apartment, I coordinated the next moves with Stanley. Every night, I reviewed Robert's reports, learning more about the monster my son had become. Every dawn, I planned the next step of my meticulous revenge. The first phase was psychological. I needed Thomas to feel like he was in control, that he had won. I needed him to become complacent, to lower his guard. That's why I had not given any sign of life. That's why I had let him believe that I was hiding in some corner, crying and feeling defeated. Stanley had explained the legal process to me. We have evidence of the attempted poisoning, he told me, the children's medical analysis, Laura's testimony, the recordings you made of his confessions. Yes, I had recorded our entire conversation at Natalie's house, a small device Robert had given me, hidden in my purse. But, Stanley continued, a criminal process is going to be long and complicated. There will be media coverage. There will be public scandal. Are you prepared for that? I was more than prepared. After 40 years in the shadows, I was ready to come out into the light and show the world who Thomas really was. Besides, he added with a smile, we have evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and financial manipulation. We can destroy him economically before the criminal process even begins. Economically? The word sounded delicious. Thomas had tried to kill me for money. Now he was going to lose all his money for trying to kill me. During those weeks of silence, I also worked on myself. I hired Yolanda, a personal stylist who completely transformed my image. Goodbye to old, conservative clothes. Goodbye to grey, unkempt hair. Goodbye to the hunched posture of the defeated woman. When Yolanda finished with me, I did not recognize myself in the mirror. My hair was dyed an elegant brown, cut in a modern style that took 10 years off me. My clothes were sophisticated but not ostentatious. Quality suits, designer shoes, discreet but expensive accessories. Dorothy, Yolanda told me, admiring her work, you look like a woman of power. A woman of power? I liked the sound of that. For 40 years, I had been a woman of service, a woman of sacrifice, a woman of shadows. Now it was time to be a woman of power. The last element of my transformation was the most important. My attitude. I hired a personal coach, a psychologist specializing in female empowerment. Dorothy, she told me in our first session, you have to stop seeing yourself as a victim. You are a survivor. You are a warrior. The sessions were revealing. For decades, I had confused love with submission, kindness with permissiveness, motherhood with total self-denial. I had raised a monster because I had been afraid of being a bad mother if I set limits. True love, the psychologist explained to me, includes consequences. If there are no consequences for bad actions, there is no love. There is complicity. Complicity. For 40 years, I had been an accomplice in my son's transformation into a sociopath. But no more. The new Dorothy was not an accomplice to anyone. The new Dorothy was a force of nature that was about to unleash upon Thomas's world like a devastating hurricane. One night, exactly 1 month after our confrontation, I decided it was time to make my first public appearance. I carefully chose the location, the most exclusive art gallery in the city, where a private collection of contemporary paintings was being exhibited. I dressed in a black designer suit, high heels that made me look taller and more imposing, and jewelry I had bought that very afternoon. When I arrived at the gallery in a luxury taxi, the society photographers turned to look at me. They did not recognize me, but they instinctively knew I was someone important. I walked through the gallery with a glass of champagne in my hand, admiring the artwork, conversing with collectors and critics. For the first time in decades, I felt in my element. Elegant, sophisticated, powerful. And then I saw him. Thomas was in the opposite corner of the gallery, accompanied by Laura. She looked tense, uncomfortable, clearly out of place in that luxurious environment. He was trying to impress some businessman, probably looking for new victims for his scams. Our eyes met across the room. I saw the shock on his face when he recognized me. The defeated woman he had left crying a month ago had been replaced by this sophisticated and mysterious version of his mother. I approached slowly, savoring every step. When I reached him, I smiled at him with a poisonous sweetness. "Hello, Thomas," I said to him in a voice that dripped power. "What a surprise to run into you here." His face had turned pale. Laura looked at me with a mixture of admiration and confusion. The businessmen who were talking to Thomas turned toward me with curiosity. "Mum," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" His voice trembled slightly. For the first time in his life, my presence intimidated him. "I'm enjoying my retirement," I replied, taking a sip of champagne. I decided it was time to treat myself. The word retirement echoed in the air like a veiled threat. The businessmen looked at us with interest. It was obvious there was family tension, but it was also obvious that I was not the victim they had imagined. "Retirement?" one of them asked politely. "What are you retiring from, Mum?" "From being too generous," I replied without taking my eyes off Thomas. "Sometimes when you give too much, people get used to receiving. There comes a point where you have to stop giving and start collecting." "Collecting?" The word floated in the air like a promise of a storm. Thomas knew exactly what it meant. He knew his time of taking without giving had ended. He knew the hunt had begun, and now he was the prey. The following days were of exquisite tension. Thomas knew something had changed, but he did not know what. He had seen me at the gallery, transformed into a woman he did not recognize, and that made him uneasy. He began calling me obsessively, but I did not answer. I let his calls go to voicemail, where I could hear his growing nervousness. "Mum, answer the phone," he said in his messages. "We need to talk. I need to know what you are planning." What are you planning? For the first time in his life, he was the one who was afraid of me. For the first time, I was the predator and he was the prey. Stanley had begun the legal phase of my revenge. The first thing was to file a civil lawsuit for attempted murder, with all the evidence we had gathered. The children's medical analysis, the audio recordings, the testimonies of Laura and the medical staff who had treated my grandchildren. "Dorothy," Stanley told me in his office, "this lawsuit is going to be a scandal. The media are going to cover the case. Your story is going to be on every newscast." Perfect. I wanted the whole world to know who Thomas really was. I wanted his neighbors in Connecticut, his co-workers, his friends, to know that he had tried to murder his own mother. But the civil lawsuit was only the appetizer. The main course was the investigation Robert had completed into Thomas's illegal activities. Mortgage fraud, misuse of family funds, defrauding loan sharks, tax evasion. My son had built a financial house of cards that was about to collapse. "Here are all the documents," Robert said, handing me 3 folders full of evidence. "Your son has been stealing from his own family for months. Laura can sue him for marital fraud and recover everything he stole." Marital fraud. The words sounded delicious. I decided it was time to have a conversation with Laura. Despite all our past problems, she was also a victim of Thomas. She had also been deceived, manipulated, stolen from, and most importantly, she was the mother of my grandchildren, the children who had been about to die because of their father. I invited her to lunch at the most elegant restaurant in the city. When she arrived, I saw the surprise in her eyes at seeing my new version. I was no longer the modest, resigned mother-in-law she had known for years. I was a woman of power who had decided to take control of her destiny. "Laura," I said to her after we ordered our turkey clubs, "we need to talk." She nodded nervously. She knew something big was coming. "I know everything about Thomas's debts. I know about the gambling, about the loan sharks, about the mortgage he put on your house without your knowledge." Her face fell apart. How do you know that? She murmured. Because I hired investigators, I replied calmly. Because I decided to stop being the victim and become the hunter. I handed her one of the folders Robert had prepared. Everything is there. Documents, photographs, bank records. Laura reviewed the papers with tears in her eyes. Each page was a deeper betrayal. Her husband had not only tried to murder his mother-in-law, but had been systematically stealing his family's future to feed his gambling addiction. Dorothy, she said to me with a broken voice, I didn't know any of this. He told me there were problems at work, that we needed to economize. I never imagined that he was— Her voice was lost in sobs. That he was destroying our lives. Laura, I said, taking her hand, you are not to blame for anything. Thomas deceived both of us, but now we have the opportunity to get justice. I explained my plan. She could file a lawsuit for marital fraud, recover the house, protect the children's future. I would help her with the legal expenses. But, I added firmly, I need you to testify against Thomas. I need you to tell the whole truth about the chocolates, about his confession, about everything you have seen. She did not hesitate for a second. Of course, she told me. It is the least I can do after everything that has happened. While we were eating our mashed potatoes, Thomas arrived at the restaurant. It was no coincidence. He had been following her, worried about this meeting between his wife and his mother. When he saw us together, sharing documents, his face transformed into a mask of panic. He approached our table with agitated steps. What are you doing? He asked in a tense voice. What are you talking about? His desperation was palpable. He knew his world of lies was collapsing. We are talking about you, I replied with a cold smile. We are talking about your debts, your lies, about how you have been stealing from your own family. Thomas looked at the documents on the table, and his face completely collapsed. Laura, he pleaded with his wife, don't listen to this crazy old woman. She's trying to manipulate you, to separate us. Crazy old woman. Even in that moment of total panic, he could not stop insulting me. He was incapable of showing respect or remorse. Thomas, Laura told him in a voice I had not heard before, a voice full of strength and determination. I know everything now. I know about the gambling, about the debts, about the mortgage. I know you have been lying for months. He tried to deny it, but she interrupted him. And I know you tried to kill your mother. She shouted the last words, attracting the attention of the entire restaurant. The diners turned toward us, murmuring among themselves. Thomas realized he was being watched and lowered his voice, but his desperation was increasingly evident. Laura, please, he whispered to her. We can fix this. We can work it out together. You don't need to listen to this woman. She has always tried to separate us, always manipulating, always blaming others, never taking responsibility for her actions. No, Laura replied firmly. No more. No more lies. No more manipulation. I am going to protect our children, and that means taking them away from you. She got up from the table, picked up her purse, and headed for the exit. My lawyers will be in touch with you. Thomas stood there, next to our table, trembling with rage and impotence. When Laura left, he turned to me with a fury that reminded me why I had decided to destroy him. This is your fault, he hissed through clenched teeth. You ruined my marriage. You destroyed my family. I didn't destroy anything, I replied with supernatural calm. I only brought the truth to light. Your marriage was ruined when you decided to become a liar and a thief. Your family was destroyed when you decided to try to murder your mother. I got up from the table and looked him directly in the eyes. And this is just beginning. His threats followed me into the street. "You're going to regret this," he yelled as I walked toward my taxi. "You're going to pay for destroying my life." Destroying his life. He had tried to destroy mine literally, and now he complained because I was defending myself. That night, Stanley called me with news. "Dorothy, the lawsuit is already in process. The media have started calling. They want interviews. They want your side of the story." It was exactly what I had expected. "Schedule the interviews," I told him. "It's time for the world to know the truth." The first interview was with the most watched news program in the city, Channel 5 News. I arrived at the studio impeccably dressed, with the confidence of a woman who had found her power. The journalist received me with curiosity and compassion. "Miss Dorothy," she said to me in front of the cameras, "tell us your story. How did you discover that your son had tried to poison you?" I told her everything. The chocolates, Thomas's reaction, the children's poisoning, his cold and calculated confession. I spoke calmly without dramatizing, letting the facts speak for themselves. "How does a mother feel when she discovers that her son wants to kill her?" the journalist asked me. "She feels free," I replied. "She feels free from an illusion she had maintained for 40 years. She feels free to stop protecting someone who never protected her." The interview went viral. Within hours, my story was on all social media. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Hundreds of women wrote to me, telling me their own stories of ungrateful children, toxic families, unrequited love. But the most satisfying part was the comments about Thomas. His co-workers began to recognize him as the son who had tried to murder his mother. His neighbors began to look at him with contempt. His friends began to distance themselves from him. The scandal followed him everywhere. When he went to the supermarket, people pointed and whispered. When he arrived at work, his colleagues avoided him. When he left his house, he felt the judgmental looks of the entire neighborhood. But I knew this was only the beginning. Public humiliation was satisfying, but true justice was yet to come. The legal processes, the loss of his assets, the complete destruction of the life he had built on lies and betrayals. Thomas had underestimated the woman he had raised for 40 years. He had thought he could get rid of me like throwing away a piece of paper. Now he was discovering that he had awakened a monster much more powerful and ruthless than himself. The hunt had officially begun, and I was a predator who had waited 40 years to show her claws. The legal process advanced like an unstoppable avalanche. Stanley had filed all the lawsuits simultaneously: attempted murder, family fraud, aggravated fraud, and a civil lawsuit for emotional damages amounting to $500,000. Thomas woke up one Monday and discovered that his life had exploded into 1,000 pieces. His bank account was immediately frozen. The few savings he had left after his compulsive gambling were blocked, while the origin of the funds was investigated. His salary was garnished to ensure payment of the civil lawsuits. Overnight, he was left penniless. "Dorothy," Stanley reported to me with satisfaction, "your son is broke. He cannot afford a decent lawyer. He's going to have to settle for a public defender." A public defender against the best law firm in the city. The battle was unequal from the start, but the most delicious thing was seeing how his social world crumbled. The video of my television interview had generated such a scandal that the media began to investigate Thomas's life more deeply. Soon his gambling debts, his scams against co-workers, and his systematic lies came to light. His boss called him to an urgent meeting. "Thomas," he said, "the company cannot afford to have its name associated with this scandal. You are terminated, effective immediately. 20 years working at the same company, eliminated by a scandal he himself had created." The loan sharks, who had been pressuring him for his gambling debts, saw the news and decided to accelerate their collections. They knew that if they did not act fast, they would not recover a single dollar. They began showing up at his house, calling him at all hours, openly threatening him. One night, while I was enjoying a glass of wine in my luxury apartment, I received a call from Laura. She was crying. "Dorothy," she told me between sobs, "men came to the house, armed men. They said that if Thomas doesn't pay them tomorrow, they are going to take the house and everything in it." "Where is Thomas?" I asked her. "He disappeared," she replied. "When he saw those men, he ran out the back door. He left me alone with the children to face those criminals. Cowardly until the end. When things got tough, he abandoned his family to save his own skin." "Laura," I told her firmly, "take the children and go to your mother's house tonight. Tomorrow morning, we are going to fix this." The time had come to show my next hand. The next morning, I arrived at Thomas's house, accompanied by Stanley and 2 bodyguards I had hired. The loan sharks were there, inspecting the property, calculating what they could take to cover the debt. When they saw me arrive, they approached with curiosity. "Ma'am," the leader of the group, a burly man with scars on his hands, said to me, "Are you related to Thomas?" "I am his mother," I replied with the same calm I would use to talk about the weather. "And I have a proposal." I pulled a signed check from my purse. "This is the exact amount my son owes you," I told them. $530,000. Take it and forget about him forever." The men looked at the check in surprise. They did not expect an elegant woman to show up with $500,000 in cash. "Why would you do this for him?" the leader asked me. "I am not doing it for him," I replied. "I am doing it for my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren. They are not to blame for living with a gambler." The man took the check, examined it carefully, and finally nodded. "Deal. Your son is debt-free with us." When they left, Laura came out of the house with tears in her eyes. "Dorothy," she said, "I cannot accept that you pay Thomas's debts." "I'm not paying them for him," I explained. "I'm paying them for you all, and it's not for free." I handed her a document that Stanley had prepared. "It's a property transfer," I explained. "The house is now in your name. Thomas no longer has a legal right to it. And this," I handed her another paper, "is a loan agreement. You owe me $530,000, but you can pay it in small installments over the next 20 years. It was a perfect agreement. Laura was protected, the children had a safe home, and Thomas lost his last economic resource. When he finally showed up, he would discover that he no longer owned anything. That afternoon, Thomas finally deigned to call me. His voice sounded desperate, broken. "Mom," he pleaded, "I need your help. The loan sharks are going to kill me if I don't pay them. I need money. I need you to forgive me. I need—" "Thomas," I interrupted him coldly, "I already paid your debts." I could hear his sigh of relief on the other side of the line. "Thank you, Mum. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I knew that, but I didn't do it for you," I continued. "I did it for Laura and the children. And you no longer have a house. I transferred it to your wife's name." The silence that followed was absolute. "What?" he finally murmured. "The house is no longer yours. Your wife owes me the money, not you. You have nothing more to do with that property." His breathing became agitated. "You can't do that," he yelled. "It's my house. I bought it." "Did you buy it with money you stole?" I replied. "And now it has returned to legitimate hands. Laura and the children are protected. You are on your own." I hung up the phone without waiting for his response. The following days were of delicious tension. Thomas showed up at the house, but Laura had already changed the locks. When he tried to force his way in, She called the police. The officers arrived and explained to him that he no longer had a legal right to the property. "But she's my wife," he yelled as they escorted him out of his own house. "I have a right to be here." "Sir," the officer told him, "your wife has requested a restraining order. You cannot approach within 200 yards of this property." Restraining order. Laura had followed my advice to the letter. Now Thomas had not only lost his house, but legally could not go near his family. He was a complete pariah, rejected by society and abandoned by his own. Homeless, jobless, penniless, Thomas was forced to take refuge in cheap, run-down motels. But even that became unsustainable when the media began following him. Reporters constantly harassed him, asking him about the attempted murder, about his debts, about his gambling addiction. One night, desperate and humiliated, he decided to do something he considered intelligent, but which turned out to be the final nail in his destruction. He created a social media profile and began live streaming, trying to tell his side of the story. "My mother is crazy," he said in front of his phone camera from a dirty motel room. "She is making all this up because she wants attention. I never tried to poison anyone. The chocolates were normal. She is manipulating my whole family against me." But the internet does not forgive. Users began bombarding him with specific questions he could not answer. "Why was there arsenic in the chocolates?" they asked. "Why did your children get poisoned?" they insisted. "Where is the proof that your mother is lying?" His broadcast went viral, but not in the way he expected. It went viral as an example of pathological narcissism, as the live confession of a man who could not accept responsibility for his actions. The comments were brutal, ruthless, merciless. "This guy really thinks we're stupid," someone wrote. "His own wife is reporting him, and he says it's all a lie," added another. "Typical psychopath, always blaming others," commented a third. But what really sealed his fate was when someone asked him directly, "If you are innocent, why don't you sue your mother for defamation?" Thomas was speechless. He could not sue me because he knew I had all the evidence. He could not deny the attempted poisoning because the evidence was irrefutable. His silence at that question was interpreted by everyone as an admission of guilt. The broadcast ended abruptly when he began receiving death threats live. He had tried to manipulate public opinion and had achieved exactly the opposite. The next day, clips of his broadcast were on every newscast. Behavioral analysts dissected him as a case study of malignant narcissism. Psychologists explained on television how his inability to accept responsibility was typical of antisocial personalities. Thomas had achieved something that I could not have achieved even with the best public relations team. He had destroyed his own reputation so completely and publicly that there was no turning back. He had become the national villain, the symbol of filial ingratitude taken to the extreme. But for me, the most satisfying thing was not his public humiliation. It was the tranquility I saw in Laura's eyes when I visited her, the security my grandchildren felt in their own home, the peace I had found by moving away from the toxicity that had dominated my life for decades. Formal justice was still in process, but poetic justice had already been served. The son who had tried to kill me for money now did not have a single dollar. The man who had scorned my love now begged for my forgiveness. The manipulator had been exposed and rejected by everyone. And I, the victim who had spent 40 years in silence, had finally found my voice. The months that followed were of total transformation. While Thomas sank further and further into his own misery, I flourished as never before in my life. The luxury apartment had become my sanctuary, a place where for the first time in decades I could breathe without the weight of constant manipulation. Stanley kept me informed of the progress of the legal cases. "Dorothy," he told me during one of our weekly meetings, The district attorney is very interested in prosecuting Thomas for attempted murder. The evidence is overwhelming. The audio recordings, the medical testimonies, the confessions he himself had made, everything formed a solid and irrefutable case. Furthermore, Stanley continued with a smile, his public defender is trying to negotiate a plea bargain. He knows he cannot win this case. A plea of guilty would mean Thomas would have to publicly admit, in front of a judge, that he had tried to murder his own mother. But what truly filled me with satisfaction was seeing how Laura had flourished after breaking free from the toxicity of her marriage. Without the constant lies, without the financial stress, without the emotional manipulation, she had returned to being the strong woman I had glimpsed years ago. "Dorothy," she told me during one of our weekly lunches, "for the first time in years, I feel free. The children are happy, safe. They sleep peacefully for the first time in months. Seeing my grandchildren recover their innocence, seeing their sincere smiles, was worth more than any revenge I could plan." One afternoon, while enjoying a coffee on my apartment terrace, I received an unexpected call. It was Natalie, my sister. Her voice sounded embarrassed, guilty. "Dorothy," she told me, "I need to talk to you. I need to apologize." I decided to receive her at my house. When she arrived, the difference between us was abysmal. I looked elegant, serene, empowered. She looked consumed by guilt and shame. "Dorothy," she began with tears in her eyes, "I knew Thomas had problems, but I never imagined he was capable of trying to kill you." "Natalie," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "you always knew there was something wrong with him. You always justified him. You always protected him from the consequences of his actions." She nodded, unable to deny the truth. "I know I was an accomplice to his behavior. I know I failed you as a sister. What hurts me the most," she continued, "is that when he came to ask me for refuge after trying to poison you, I welcomed him into my house. I protected him, knowing what he had done." Her tears were genuine. Her repentance seemed real, but the damage was already done. "Natalie," I told her without cruelty, but with firmness, "for 40 years, you chose to protect a monster instead of protecting your sister. I cannot simply forget that because you feel guilty now." She left my house crying, but I felt at peace. I had set clear limits. I had expressed my truth without aggression, but without concessions. The criminal trial began 6 months after the attempted poisoning. The media covered every detail, every testimony, every piece of evidence presented. I testified with a serenity that impressed even the most experienced reporters. "Ms. Dorothy," the prosecutor asked me, "how did you feel when you discovered that your son had planned your death?" "I felt liberated," I replied, looking directly at Thomas in the dock. "Liberated from 40 years of manipulation, from 40 years of giving unconditional love to someone incapable of reciprocating it." Thomas looked haggard, aged, destroyed. His public defender had done what he could, but the evidence was irrefutable. The testimonies of Laura, of the doctors who treated the children, of the specialists who analyzed the chocolates, built a perfect case. When it came time for his testimony, Thomas attempted one last manipulation. "I loved my mother," he declared with false tears. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt anyone." But his own recordings betrayed him. When the prosecutor played the audio where he confessed his plan, his version completely crumbled. The jury deliberated for barely 2 hours, guilty of attempted first-degree murder, guilty of endangering the lives of minors, guilty of aggravated fraud. The sentence was 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 8. When I heard the verdict, I did not feel triumph. I felt peace, justice. The legal confirmation of what I already knew, that I had been the victim of a calculated and premeditated attempted murder by my own son. Thomas looked at me from the dock as he was being handcuffed. His eyes no longer held the arrogance of before, only desperation and self-pity. "Mom," he yelled as they took him away. "You're still my mother. You can't abandon me like this." But I remained motionless, serene, watching him move away toward his inevitable destiny. The civil cases were quickly resolved after the criminal conviction. The lawsuit for emotional damages resulted in a compensation of $300,000, which Thomas, of course, could not pay from prison. But the symbolism was important. The legal system had officially recognized the harm he had caused me. Laura obtained a divorce and full custody of the children. Thomas lost all his parental rights after being found guilty of endangering their lives. My grandchildren were finally legally protected from their father's toxic influence. One afternoon, while organizing my new legal documents, I found a letter I had written but never sent years ago. It was a letter of thanks to Thomas for being the best son in the world. I read it and could not help but laugh bitterly. How blind I had been. How naive. How completely disconnected from reality. I decided to write a new letter, but this time for myself. "Dear Dorothy," I wrote, "for 40 years, you confused love with complicity. You confused kindness with permissiveness. You confused sacrifice with virtue. Today, I celebrate that you have finally learned the difference. On the day I turned 70, I hosted a small celebration in my apartment. I invited Laura and the children, Stanley and his wife, Yolanda my stylist, Robert the investigator. People who had helped me rebuild my life, who had supported me in my transformation. When I blew out the candles on my cake, I made a silent wish that no woman would have to wait until her 70s to find her strength, to set limits, to defend herself from those who abused her love. That night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken, from silent victim to empowered woman, from selfless mother to a person who valued herself, from a woman who gave everything without receiving anything to a woman who had learned that self-love is not selfishness, it is survival. Thomas had wanted to kill me to steal my money, but he had achieved something completely opposite. He had awakened a woman I did not know existed within me. A woman strong, intelligent, capable of fighting for what belonged to her. Formal justice had been served, but the real victory was personal. I had recovered my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live without fear or manipulation. 2 years after the sentencing, my life had found a balance I never thought possible. The emotional wounds had healed, not with forgetting, but with wisdom. I had learned that healing does not mean forgetting, but integrating the pain into a new, stronger version of yourself. My daily routine was a testament to my newfound freedom. I woke up without the weight of the anxiety I had carried for decades. I had scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast while reading the financial news, because I had decided to learn to manage my investments personally. Stanley had introduced me to Oscar, an ethical financial consultant who taught me that money could be a tool for empowerment, not just for survival. "Dorothy," Oscar told me during one of our sessions, "you have enough capital to live comfortably for the rest of your life and leave a considerable inheritance." Inheritance, the word that had motivated the attempted murder, now had a completely different meaning for me. I had decided to create a trust for my grandchildren, administered by Laura until they turned 25. I also established a foundation to help older women victims of family abuse. My traumatic experience had turned into social purpose. The children visited my apartment every weekend. Seeing their little faces light up when they arrived was the most powerful medicine for any residual sadness. "Grandma Dorothy," little Anne would say to me. Why doesn't Dad live with us anymore? These were difficult questions that Laura and I had learned to answer with age-appropriate honesty. Dad made choices that hurt a lot of people, Laura would explain. Sometimes, when someone hurts others, they have to go to a special place to learn how to behave better. The children accepted these explanations with the natural resilience of childhood, but I knew they would eventually need more details. One afternoon, while playing with my grandchildren in the Central Park near my apartment, I saw an older woman sitting alone on a bench. She looked sad, lost, with that expression that I knew too well. I approached and started a conversation. "I'm Yolanda," she told me. Not Yolanda the stylist, but another woman who coincidentally had the same name. "I live with my son and his wife, but I feel invisible. They treat me like a burden." Her story resonated deeply with me. It was like seeing my past reflected in another person. I told her my experience, without dramatic details, but with the honesty of someone who had traveled through the same darkness. "Yolanda," I told her, "you do not have to accept being treated as a burden. You have rights, you have value, you have options." That conversation became the germ of something bigger. I began organizing weekly meetings in my apartment for older women facing similar situations. We called it the Circle of Strength. Every Thursday afternoon, my living room filled with stories of survival, mutual support, of women rediscovering themselves. Stanley helped me formalize the foundation, the Dorothy Foundation for the Dignity of the Older Woman, it was finally called. Our first project was a temporary shelter for elderly women victims of family abuse. The second was a free legal assistance program. The media began calling me to talk about the issue of elder abuse. My story had resonated so much that I became, without seeking it, a voice for other victims. Family abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises, I would say in interviews. Sometimes the abuse is emotional, financial, psychological. One morning, exactly 3 years after the attempted poisoning, I received a letter from prison. It was from Thomas. My first impulse was to throw it away unread, but curiosity won out. I opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Mum," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I have been reflecting on what I did." The letter continued with what seemed like genuine apologies, expressions of remorse, promises of change, but there was something in the tone that felt familiar. Subtle manipulation, the attempt to elicit pity. "I've been going to psychological therapy," he wrote. "The psychologist says I have deep issues that come from my early abandonment, from the death of my biological parents." Even from prison, he continued to blame others for his decisions. He was still incapable of assuming full responsibility. "Please, Mom," the letter ended. "Give me a chance to repair the damage I caused. Agree to visit me. I need to see you. I need your forgiveness to be able to heal. I need, I need, I need." It had always been about what he needed, never about what I needed or deserved. I showed the letter to my psychologist, the doctor who had helped me through my healing process. "Dorothy," she told me after reading it, "how do you feel reading this?" "I feel sorry," I replied. "But not for him. I feel sorry because after 3 years in prison, he still doesn't truly understand what he did." "Are you going to answer him?" she asked. "Are you going to visit him?" I reflected for days on that question. Part of me, the mother I had been for 40 years, felt the obligation to respond. But the new woman who had emerged from the ashes knew that my healing did not depend on forgiving the person who had tried to kill me. I finally decided to write a response, but not the one he expected. "Thomas," I wrote, "I received your letter. I am glad to know that you are reflecting on your actions. However, my healing process does not require seeing you or forgiving you. I have learned that forgiveness is for the benefit of the one who forgives, not the one who asks for it. I have built a fulfilling life without you, my letter continued. I have found peace, purpose, and happiness. Your absence is not an emptiness in my life. It is a space filled with tranquility. I hope you find your own redemption, but my path to healing no longer includes trying to save you from the consequences of your decisions. I signed the letter simply as Dorothy, not as Mum. That title had been revoked the day he decided to become my potential killer. I sent the letter and felt a profound release. I had definitively closed the last chapter of that toxic relationship. Laura had also rebuilt her life. She had started studying psychology, inspired by our experience. I want to help other families identify signs of manipulation before it's too late, she told me. Her transformation from silent victim to active advocate was inspiring. The children were growing up healthy and safe. They occasionally asked about their father, but without the anguish they had shown during the years of family toxicity. Emotional stability had replaced the constant chaos that had marked their early years. One afternoon, while reviewing the Foundation's reports, I realized something extraordinary. In 2 years, we had helped more than 200 older women escape abusive situations. Some had recovered properties stolen by manipulative children. Others had found the courage to report abuse. All had rediscovered their dignity. My personal story of survival had become a beacon of hope for other women. The attempted murder that had sought to silence me forever had ended up amplifying my voice beyond what I had ever imagined. That night, as I gazed at the city from my terrace, I reflected on the perfect irony of my situation. Thomas had wanted to kill me to steal my inheritance, but he had managed for me to build a much more valuable legacy, a foundation that would last beyond my death, helping generations of women find their strength. The woman I had been for 70 years had symbolically died on the day of the poisoned chocolates. The woman who had been born from those ashes was stronger, wiser, more complete. I had learned that sometimes, to find the light, you have to go through the deepest darkness. My revenge had been complete, but not because of Thomas's destruction, but because of my own reconstruction. The best revenge had turned out to be living fully, without fear, without guilt, without the shadow of manipulation darkening my days. 5 years after the sentencing, my life had reached a fullness I never thought possible. The Foundation had grown exponentially, with offices in 3 states and a team of 20 dedicated professionals. We had helped more than 500 women regain their dignity and autonomy. One morning, Stanley called me with unexpected news. "Dorothy," he told me with a grave voice, "Thomas is applying for parole. He has served 5 years of his sentence, and his lawyer argues good behavior." My heart momentarily sped up, but the anxiety lasted only seconds. I was no longer the vulnerable woman I had been. "What does that mean for us?" I asked calmly. "It means there will be a hearing," Stanley explained. "The judge will review his case. He will hear testimonies for and against his release. You have the right to testify." I decided it was time to face Thomas one last time, but from a position of absolute power. For 5 years, I had built a new identity, a new life, a new purpose. He had remained stagnant in a cell, paying for his crimes. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the courthouse accompanied by Laura, who was now a licensed psychologist and the associate director of my foundation. We dressed professionally, projecting the image of the successful women we had managed to become. When Thomas entered the room, his appearance struck me. 5 years of prison had transformed him into a prematurely aged man. His hair was completely grey, his face marked by deep wrinkles, his posture hunched by defeat. There was no trace left of the arrogant man who had tried to murder me. His lawyer presented the case for parole. "My client has shown genuine remorse," he argued. "He has participated in rehabilitation programs. He has maintained excellent conduct. He has expressed sincere desires to repair the damage caused to his family." When it was my turn to testify, I rose with the serenity of someone who has found inner peace. "Your Honor," I began, "for 5 years, I have observed the consequences of the defendant's actions, not only in my life, but in the lives of his children, who have thrived in an environment free from his toxic influence." I looked directly at Thomas as I spoke. "I have built a foundation that has helped 500 women victims of family abuse. Every one of those stories reminds me why it is important for actions to have real and lasting consequences." "Mr. Thomas not only attempted to murder me," I continued firmly. "He endangered the lives of his own children. He stole from his family. He lied systematically for years. His early release would send a dangerous message that repentance after being caught can erase the severity of trying to murder your own mother." The judge listened intently, taking notes. When Thomas had the opportunity to speak, he addressed me directly. "Mom," he said with a broken voice, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I have changed. I have understood the damage I caused. I have spent 5 years reflecting on my mistakes." His words sounded rehearsed, calculated to generate compassion, but they no longer had power over me. "Thomas," I replied calmly, "you lost the right to call me mother the day you decided to become my potential killer. 5 years in prison do not erase 40 years of manipulation or the trauma of discovering that your own son wanted to see you dead." Laura's testimony was devastating for his chances. As a professional psychologist, she explained to the judge the patterns of narcissistic and manipulative behavior she had observed for years. "The children have prospered without their father's presence," she declared. "They have developed emotional stability, security, confidence. His release would represent a setback in their psychological development." The prosecutor presented evidence that Thomas had attempted to contact loan sharks from prison, suggesting that his gambling addiction problems persisted. He had also received money from unidentified sources in his commissary account, suggesting continuous links to questionable activities. After 2 hours of deliberation, the judge announced his decision. "Parole request denied," he declared. "The defendant will serve his full sentence." The premeditated nature of his crimes, combined with the pattern of manipulative behavior and the lack of genuine remorse, make his early release inappropriate. Thomas slumped in his chair. His 5 years of good behavior and mandatory therapy had not been enough to convince the legal system that he had truly changed. He would have to serve 7 more years before being eligible for parole again. When we left the courthouse, I felt a deep but tranquil satisfaction. It was not vengeful triumph, but the confirmation that justice had prevailed. Thomas would pay fully for his crimes, while I continued to build a legacy of hope and empowerment. That afternoon, during the weekly meeting of our Circle of Strength, I shared the experience with the women of the group. "Today I faced my aggressor once more," I told them, "but no longer from fear or vulnerability. I faced him from the power I have built during these years." Yolanda, the woman I had met in the park years ago, and who now coordinated one of our programs, raised her hand. "Dorothy," she said, "your story has taught us that it is never too late to reclaim our dignity. At 70, you found your strength. I found mine at 65. That night, alone in my apartment, I wrote in my diary, "Today I definitively closed the darkest chapter of my life. Thomas will remain in prison 7 more years, but I no longer live in the emotional prison he built for me. I am free. I am powerful. I am whole. Looking out the window at the illuminated city, I reflected on the path traveled. From silent victim to advocate for other victims. From invisible woman to recognized community leader. From selfless mother to a woman who had learned that self-love is not selfishness, it is survival. The transformation had been painful, but necessary. Like a butterfly that must destroy its cocoon to fly, I had to destroy the permissive version of myself to become the strong woman I always had the potential to be. Tomorrow, I would continue my work at the foundation. I would continue helping other women find their voice. I would continue building a legacy that transcended personal revenge. Because I had learned that the best response to an attempt at destruction is not reciprocal destruction, but the construction of something beautiful and lasting. Thomas had wanted to eliminate me to steal my monetary inheritance. He had achieved exactly the opposite. He had awakened a much more valuable inheritance in the form of strength, wisdom, and purpose that I now shared with hundreds of women. Justice does not always come fast, but when it comes, it is complete and definitive. 10 years had passed since the day that changed my destiny forever. Now, at 79, I contemplated my life with a deep satisfaction I never thought possible. The Dorothy Foundation had grown to become a recognized national institution, with shelters in 8 cities and a legal assistance program that had helped more than 2,000 women. My grandchildren, now teenagers, visited every weekend. Anne was 16 and had decided to study law, inspired by our family history. "Grandma," she told me during one of our conversations, "I want to be like you. I want to defend people who cannot defend themselves." Her younger brother, Charles, who was 14, showed an extraordinary emotional maturity for his age. Laura had become a nationally recognized psychologist, specializing in family trauma and elder abuse. We had written a book together titled "It's Never Too Late: Finding Your Strength After 70, which had become a bestseller and been translated into several languages. One spring morning, while reviewing correspondence in my foundation office, I received a call that transported me to the past. It was the warden of the prison where Thomas was serving his sentence. "Ms. Dorothy," he told me with a grave voice, "I have to inform you that your son passed away last night." The news impacted me, but not as I had expected. I did not feel maternal pain or devastating loss. I felt a strange mixture of sadness for what could have been, and relief for the definitive closing of that chapter. "What happened?" I asked with professional calm. "It was a sudden heart attack," the warden explained. "The doctors say he had developed severe heart problems, probably related to stress and depression. He died sleeping, without pain." The irony was absolute. He had planned my death by heart attack with poisoned chocolates, and he had finally died of a real heart attack. "He left a letter addressed to you," the warden continued. "He wishes for us to send it to you." After a moment of reflection, I agreed to receive it. I needed to know his last words, not out of nostalgia, but to completely close this cycle of my life. The letter arrived 2 days later. I opened it with steady hands, without trembling or anxiety. "Dear Mom," it began in shaky handwriting, "I write this knowing that I will probably die in this prison. For 10 years, I have reflected on what I did, on the monster I became. I understand now that there is no possible forgiveness for trying to murder the woman who gave me everything," it continued. "I do not seek your compassion or your absolution. I just want you to know that my last conscious thought was of genuine regret for having failed you so profoundly. I have followed your work with the foundation from here," he wrote. "The other inmates show me newspaper articles about your achievements. It fills me with a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride because you are extraordinary. Shame because I almost destroyed someone so valuable. The letter ended with words that surprised me with their apparent sincerity. I die knowing that the world is a better place because you survived and prospered. I hope my death brings you the final peace you deserve. With love and eternal remorse, Thomas. After reading the letter, I put it away in my desk. I did not feel the need to cry or to forgive posthumously. I simply felt that a very long and painful book had finally reached its last page. The funeral was a small, private ceremony. Laura, the children, Stanley, and I attended. There were no emotional or nostalgic speeches. It was a sober farewell to someone who had chosen the path of destruction and had paid the full consequences. Anne, with the wisdom of her 16 years, approached me after the service. "Grandma," she said, "are you sad?" "I am at peace," I replied. "Sometimes the deepest sadness is for what never was, not for what was lost." That night, in the solitude of my apartment, I wrote the final entry about Thomas in my diary. Today I buried the son I adopted 47 years ago, but the son I truly loved died 10 years ago, the day he decided to become my killer. Today I only buried the remains of that decision. The following months were of extraordinary productivity, without the looming shadow of Thomas, without the possibility of future legal hearings or confrontations. I dedicated myself completely to expanding the work of the Foundation. We established a university scholarship program for older women who wanted to resume their studies after escaping abusive situations. We also created a research center on elder abuse, directed by Laura. Our studies began to influence national public policies for the protection of older people. My personal experience had become a catalyst for broad social change. On my 80th birthday, we organized a benefit gala for the Foundation. The event brought together politicians, businessmen, academics, and, most importantly, hundreds of women whose lives had been transformed by our programs. During my speech that night, I reflected on the central lesson of my experience. I have learned that kindness without limits is not virtue, it is self-neglect. I have learned that unconditional love must include self-love. I have learned that sometimes, to save yourself, you have to be willing to disappoint those who expect you to sacrifice yourself endlessly. My story began as a tragedy, I continued, the attempted murder by my own son. But it turned into a story of rebirth, of discovery, of purpose. Because I chose not to remain in the role of the victim, but to transform my pain into power to help others. When I finished my speech, the 2,000 people present stood up in an ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But what moved me the most were the tears in the eyes of Anne and Charles, my grandchildren, who looked at me with an admiration that had been earned through example and resilience. That night, back home, I sat on my terrace to contemplate the city. 10 years ago, I had been a 70-year-old woman, vulnerable, manipulated, almost murdered. Now I was an 80-year-old woman, powerful, respected, with a legacy that would last generations. The most perfect revenge had turned out to be the construction of an extraordinary life. Thomas had wanted to eliminate me to steal my money, but he had managed to awaken my true potential. He had wanted to silence me forever, but he had amplified my voice until it became a chorus of empowered women. I wrote in my diary that night, I do not regret adopting him. I only regret not having understood sooner that kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. My son wanted to kill me, but instead of destroying me, he freed me to become who I was always meant to be. The story had ended, but the legacy was just beginning. Every woman who found her strength through our programs was a victory over the mentality that had created Thomas. Every limit set, every firm no uttered, Every act of self-love was a silent revolution against the culture that teaches women to give everything without receiving anything. It had taken me 70 years to find my power, but I had used every day of the last 10 to ensure that other women would not have to wait so long. That was my true inheritance. Not money, but wisdom. Not property, but purpose. Not revenge, but victory through transformation. The circle had closed perfectly, and I was at peace.